All right. As I said, my name is John Noto. I'm one of the directors here at Whitestone Counseling. I'll be hosting the webinar, so I will be keeping an eye on the chat. If anybody has any tech issues, or importantly, if you have any questions about the content or questions you'd like Luis and Kristen to speak to after the presentation, I'd be happy to facilitate that. Just know that as participants, your cameras are not on, your microphones are not on. I know I'm always wondering that and double, triple checking that. This is really just a presentation, but I will be monitoring the chat. I'm so glad you're joining us today for this webinar on the principles of making marriage work. Whether you're married or engaged or just looking to grow in your understanding of relationships, this is the right place for you. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to introduce Whitestone Counseling Resources. We are a Christian counseling ministry that is dedicated to helping individuals, couples, and families find healing, build stronger relationships, and to renew their faith. For over 25 years, we've partnered with local churches in the area to offer counseling, workshops, trainings, and always with the goal of serving the church and bringing hope to those in need. Today, this afternoon, I have the pleasure of hosting my friends Luis and Kristen, who have shared this content before. They'll be leading us through this discussion on what truly makes marriages and relationships thrive. They're going to be sharing research-backed strategies and practical insights to help couples foster trust and intimacy, and of course, healthy communication. So whether you are currently married or you're preparing for a future relationship, this webinar is going to be great at equipping you with valuable tools to strengthen that connection. So I'm really excited for what is ahead, and I hope this time encourages and empowers you. So let's go ahead and get started.
Thank you, John, for hosting Kristen and I. As John mentioned, we've been doing this workshop for a couple of years now. And we actually do the 7 principles for making marriage work over 8 hours. So doing this in about an hour, it's of course challenging, but we're going to try to do our best to share the principles, help you understand them, and have you reflect on whether these principles are already part of your relationship. And if not, it is never too late to start living out the principles in your relationship. So let's go ahead and jump in. The 7 principles of making marriage work. Again, I just want to say that we are so happy that you have joined us this afternoon. We are glad that you're here. And today we're going to be diving into what makes marriage work, what makes it truly work. And I think when Kristen and I were asking our staff to share the event, they were asking, who is this webinar for? And we said it's for everyone. It's for those that are newlywed. It's for those that have been married for a long time. And the thing that we want to share with you is what is the foundation, or what becomes part of the foundation of a strong marriage. And there are 3 things that we want you to think about. The first one is that the foundation of a strong marriage is built on deep friendship, share meaning, and effective conflict management. These elements aren't just something that we're pulling out of our hat, but it's something that have been backed by over 5 decades of research done by Dr. John Gottman and his team, where they have studied thousands of couples and found that successful marriages have patterns that we can all learn from. So today we're going to be jumping into these 7 principles for making marriage work. One of the things that stands out from his research is when he was studying couples, he came up with 2 terms. He says, we have couples that are masters in relationships, and we have couples that are disasters in relationship. That's his term, not mine. But I think it's something that we can, reflect on. Are we a master in our relationship, or are we not getting along and feeling like it's a disaster sometimes? But one of the things that really stood out from his research is that John Gottman and his team were able to predict with 90% accuracy whether a couple was going to stay or divorce just by observing a short conversation that they were having. And the key difference that they saw between those that were masters versus those that were disasters is how they handle conflict and how they connected in their relationship. So they look at physiology, what was happening in their bodies. They looked at their communication patterns, how they were talking with one another. And they were able to determine that there are some things that those that are heading to separation or divorce were practicing some unhealthy ways of communication.
Mhm.
Kristen will talk about some of these patterns next.
I will. Hi, guys. Welcome. I'm happy to be here today. I'm in my 25th year of marriage. And so I think that, to Luis's point, this information is so relevant regardless of where you're at. And so I wish I knew this information 25 years ago, but I'm doing my best to incorporate it now, as it really is a game changer, I think, in any relationship. So what's so fascinating about Dr. John Gottman is really the approach he took to collecting his data. And he said he's not really a couples person per se, but he's a researcher. And so what he did was he called all of these couples into this very unique space he called the Love Lab. And what he would do is he would have couples come in and he would just observe from a physiological standpoint. He would check heart rate, he would check urine, he checked blood, he checked all of these things, and he had all his researchers observing. And so what he has really concluded in this 5 decades of research is that there's 4 patterns of behavior that are high predictors of divorce. And I think that this can be really harsh to start off the topic with our webinar today, because it's a somber topic to think about. We're talking about divorce prevention, but really when we look at it and we take away all of the fluff, right? This is what we're talking about in our relationship, is really preserving it, is really protecting our relationship from breaking down, from demise, from divorce. So he landed on 4 patterns of behavior: criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. And to Luis's point, he said that observing a couple, and he said within 15 minutes of watching any couple, he could predict with 85% accuracy if that couple would be divorced in 3 years. And that's really startling data. And it really highlights that these patterns of behavior are so important for us to be aware of when they're presenting themselves in our body. And we all do these things. So we're going to move into the next slide and start to talk about the first one. Okay, so the first of these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which I think is such kind of this doom and gloom kind of name, but if we view them like that, they are that destructive in and to our relationship. So the first one is criticism, right? And this is really this pattern. It's a way of complaining that says your partner's personality is defective. Right? You see some of our kind of quotes here. You always do this. What's the matter with you? What is your problem? You'll recognize this in yourself when you hear yourself using the word you, right? And it personalizes it, and it's going to create this tension immediately in any conversation. And it's really important to recognize when this is present in your body, and to recognize that this pattern of behavior over time is going to lead to the breakdown in your relationships. Again, this is really naming that there's something wrong with your partner at their core, not what they did, but something's wrong with them. The second one is defensiveness. And I think we all, again, as we talk about this, you're going to recognize that you have felt these in yourself and in your partner. And defensiveness is that innate instinctual part of us that wants to protect ourselves when we're feeling attacked. So there's 2 types of defensiveness. One is this kind of counterattack, which is someone's throwing a ball at you and you are literally hitting it back into the outfield. So it's a counterattack. It's, oh yeah, what's wrong with you? Like you immediately flip it. You spin it so that you're not dealing with what they're talking about, but you're making it personal and putting it on them. The second part of defensiveness that we see in ourselves and our partner is this posture of whining, playing the role of the victim and avoiding responsibility, right? I can't do anything right. Always me. I get blamed for everything. And so it's this posture of just victim mentality where you're not willing to take responsibility, and you go into this whining kind of complaining mode in the relationship, which really avoids and deflects from dealing with what the conflict actually is. I've talked about the first 2. I'm going to turn it back to Luis for a moment to talk about the next 2.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. I think what's interesting about the research that John Gottman did was that he made the connection that these four horsemen built on one another. But it is a normal human reaction when you feel criticized to want to defend yourself. And then you, as a couple, might get into this blame and defend cycle. Someone criticizes, the other one defends by criticizing back, and then the other person defends by criticizing back. And then so you have this dynamic of blame and defend. Eventually, you move away from blame and defense by moving into the third horseman, which is contempt. And according to his research, contempt is the most dangerous horseman because it conveys disrespect, superiority, and disgust. It looks like name calling, sarcasm, eye rolling, and mocking your partner. I think one of the examples that I tend to hear sometimes is something like your spouse forgets to take out the trash, and then with a sarcastic tone, you say something like, you are always forgetting things, and this is what I expect from you all the time. I can never count on you, and you're not like so. And so there's comparison, there's negative humor, sarcasm, mocking. And I think eventually it just shows your spouse, or it lets your spouse know or feel that they're just not good enough for you or for the relationship. And eventually you go from criticizing your spouse to then your spouse defending themselves and criticizing you back, to eventually get into a place of contempt in the conversation, and you get to a place of stonewalling. And so stonewalling happens when one partner shuts down emotionally during conflict. It's like they hit a wall and disengage completely, leaving you, the other person, feeling unheard and alone. And we see this oftentimes maybe more common in men. Women, maybe, according to his research, maybe women might criticize, men might defend. Eventually, both might feel contempt, and eventually, men will withdraw or stonewall. It's not like that in all relationships. Relationships are different, but I think it's important to name it and recognize that we can emotionally and physically just withdraw and walk away. Common for someone to leave the room or get in their car and just drive away. I was part of Willow Creek's Rebuilding Marriage Ministry. And one of the things that I remember hearing from one of the speakers when I was volunteering there is that women are able to emotionally withdraw in the moment. So women might just cross their arms and just tune out emotionally. And so both men and women can stonewall. It just might look differently in each relationship. So those are the four horsemen. We're sharing with you that these are evidence-based principles, and these are the four things to look out for in your conversation. What's happening in your body, how you're communicating with each other. And so now we're going to be moving into the 7 principles. And these are the things that we want to practice. These are the things that we want to see in our relationship with our partner, with our spouse. So we're going to move into principle number 1. And Kristen, I'll let you take us there.
Sure. I think it's always encouraging, right, to move from that hard to hear information into some antidotes, and to how we can really, now that we know that and we see that in ourselves and our partners, really, how can we protect our marriage from those patterns of behavior. And so Luis says there's 4 principles that Gottman has created. And so we are just so grateful to be able to walk you through these 4 principles today. And again, at a high level, because we're doing this relatively quickly, but hopefully it gives you an introduction to
7 principles.
What did I say? Did I say 4?
The 4 horsemen, 7 principles.
4 horsemen, yes. Thank you, Luis. And I invite Luis to please interject too with me, just to make this more conversational and interesting for you guys too. So starting with the first principle, enhancing your love maps. And if you remember that pyramid that was on the first slide that Luis showed us, this is the foundation. This is really what we're building on in all of Gottman's work and research to getting to the top. So this is the foundation. And what I love about this is, I think for so many of us, we overcomplicate what it takes to really succeed and have thriving, successful relationships. And really what Gottman has deduced is it comes down to really one thing. And that one thing is friendship. And so I loved when I heard this for the first time, because I'm like, friendship, that's doable. I can do that. And so I hope we can break this down in a way that feels manageable to implement this in your life and in your relationship, because it is basic and instinctual. So I think it'll make sense as we unpack it all for you. Principle one, he wants us to what he calls enhance our love maps. And so you can see our little cartoon chart here of a map. I want you to picture a love map is really the internal roadmap of your partner's inner world. And when we're in the dating phase, when we're getting to know our partner, it's so much fun. And we're asking all of these questions and we're getting to know them when we're hearing all of their stories. So I will tell you, 25 years into marriage, we stopped doing that same type of deep diving question asking that we probably did when we were dating 27, 28 years ago. And so what Gottman's saying is we have to continue to pursue enhancing our love map with our partner, which really means stepping into getting to know and being known to one another. And so it's not recognizing that, yeah, I knew it at one point 20 years ago. I knew who his best friend was. I knew what his dreams were. I knew what his fears were. That has changed as we've all evolved. So it's staying on top of a practice of getting to know our partner, getting to know their inner world, getting to know their values, their dreams, their stressors. So it's this constant behavior of asking questions. And so again, when it comes down to it, it really is pretty simple. But most of us can recognize that over time, we probably stop asking some of those deep questions that we did when we were in the beginning of our relationship and getting to know them for the first time. But we want to stay connected to that practice because we remember how wonderful that felt in the beginning of our relationships, right? When we were in that getting to know each other phase. And the reality is, if we stay in that space, we'll continue to have those same feelings towards our partner of getting to know them better and what's going on with them. Really, the best way to do this, if we break it down to what's our suggestion here, it's ask questions. Ask open-ended questions. Help build a continuing love map of understanding all of these aspects of your partner's life. So.
Yeah, this is, Kristen, this is one of my favorite principles, really taking the time to get to know your spouse.
Yeah.
And I think we'll talk about this at the end, but his suggestion is taking 10 minutes a day to get to know your spouse. We're changing all the time. My wife and I met when we were high schoolers. And so a lot has changed over the last 20 years. We have children and we have a mortgage and we see the world differently because we're not seeing it through those teenage eyes. We're seeing it through adult eyes. And so just taking the time to really get to know your partner, I think is essential. And this is so important. I mean, we see this in our relationship with God. God knows everything about us. He knows what we're about to say. He knows what we're thinking. He knows what we're feeling. And that's something that we want to be able to get to with our spouse. So it's a great principle, a great reminder of how important that is. The second principle is the importance of mutual appreciation, cherishment, and fondness in your relationship. Letting your spouse know that you appreciate them, letting them know that you cherish them, letting them know that you're grateful for them is so important. I think we could all get into a place in a relationship where we're pointing out the flaws or the things that we don't like or appreciate about our spouse. But in this principle, we're really slowing down and showing appreciation to one another. One of the things that comes up in our workshop that I'll share now, is how appreciation is really important for men. I share how every time my wife walks into church or a family event, all the women are telling my wife and other women how pretty they look, their hair, their makeup. And I walk into church and I walk into a family event and no one is telling me that they like my shoes or that they like how I did my hair that day. I share that because it is so important for our spouse to tell us men that they appreciate and cherish us and find us to be great. And of course, I do want all men to do the same to their wives, but know that there's a difference here. And I think a wise voice in the ear of their husband matters. And appreciating even those small things in relationships can make a big difference. So we'll take it to the next principle here.
I'll interject for 1 minute back on principle 2. And I love Gottman shares a story where he was interviewing a partner, and it was the husband, and he was asking him about his wife, and she wasn't present in the room. And he was going on and on. They'd been married 17 years, and he was just really singing her praises. And so Gottman says to him, "When was the last time you shared this with her?" And he didn't remember. And so I think an important point of fondness and admiration is to make sure it's not just something we recognize feeling towards our spouse, but it's something we outwardly communicate, right?
Yeah.
It's singing their praises in front of people, right? When you're out with another couple at the table, it's in front of the children. It's to them personally when there's no one else listening, right? So it's not only communicating with our partner, but it's communicating it outwardly. So it doesn't just stay stuck inside of us, that we appreciate them and we're fond of them, but that we're sharing it so they can hear it, because we all know matter, and how wonderful it feels to get that from our partner is such a huge part of just building that fondness and admiration in the relationship.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. It's so important. And so maybe I'll give you homework, those that are watching this webinar or maybe watching it on YouTube later. But tonight, share one specific thing that you admire about your partner, and let them know, and just see what it felt like, and just see what the response was like. And I think, as to what Kristen said, it's so important for us to not only think it, but also say it. So I definitely want to encourage you to do that. Thanks, Kristen, for pointing that out.
So number 3 is, you said number 1 was your favorite. I think number 3 to me feels like, when it was introduced to me, it felt like such a game changer, because principle 3 is this idea of turning towards each other instead of away. And so I really want to help unpack what this means. And he coined this phrase, a bid attempt. So BID attempt. And it's like a toddler pulling on your pant leg. It's, hey, I want some attention. I want you to notice me. And so I'm going to give you an example that Gottman uses that I think is really interesting. And so he says, in his love lab, it's in the middle of, it's on the West Coast and it's overlooking water. And he said he noticed somebody at the window saying, "Hey, honey, look at that boat." So that's a bid attempt, trying to get your partner's attention. If the wife doesn't look, if she doesn't acknowledge, if she's just cleaning her glasses and she doesn't acknowledge that her spouse attempted to engage her in a conversation, even just meaningless, insignificant, about a boat in the harbor, if that wife does not turn towards her husband, it is a rejected bid attempt. And what we want to recognize is that the likelihood of rebidding, the likelihood of that husband attempting again in the next moment or the moments that follow, him rebidding, is almost zero. So we don't want to make an assumption that any bid is really insignificant. We want to notice that our partner is trying to get our attention. And even if it's, that's interesting, there is a boat there, and then you turn back to what you're doing, that would be acknowledging the bid. He also has what he calls an enthusiastic bid response. So let's say the partner says, "Hey, honey, look at this boat in the harbor." And she turns and she looks at the boat and she says, "Oh my gosh, that is gorgeous. Can you imagine if someday we got to go on a boat and travel the world?" That's what we call an enthusiastic bid response. That is really leaning into the conversation, the attempt that spouse made to engage his wife in meaningful conversation. And sometimes it's meaningful, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's about the weather, or it can be as benign as, "Hey, honey, how was your day?" But what I want to communicate to all of you is that these bid attempts are so important. When love maps, principle 1, fondness and affection, principle 2, and turning towards each other, principle 3, when these 3 foundational pieces are present in a relationship, we have what we call positive sentiment override. We will be in a place to be able to handle the conflict. Whenever those horsemen come up, we will be able to handle those things. If those 3 pieces are not present in a relationship, we can move into what's called negative sentiment override, which is just a fancy term for, we're not going to be able to handle conflict very well. The emotional bank account is low and irritation is going to be high. So if you are looking for the best way to protect your marriage from divorce. It's really allowing yourself to take in what we're talking about, and these first three principles are so important. And so there's so much research into this. And again, we're going to do a workshop in a couple of weeks, and it's going to go 8 hours, and we'll get to go into these more significantly. But at the foundation level, we want you to be aware that true emotional connection is really made in these small moments, in these small bid attempts in any of our relationships.
Yeah, just to add to that, over time, it is those small moments that do build trust and intimacy in your relationship. And that is key. It is those small moments. Sometimes we think that we have to do big things to make a relationship work. And the reality is that it is those small moments that make a difference in relationship. They help us show up with a different attitude, a softer attitude in relationship. And so definitely want to encourage all of you to think about these three. I will say the principle 4 is also, all 7 principles are essential to relationship. Principle maybe 4, I think might be not the hardest, but I think oftentimes it may be a little bit more challenging. And principle number 4 says, principle number 4 here, I didn't change the screen. But principle number 4 it says you're allowing your partner or you as a couple are letting each other be influenced by one another. We know that successful marriages thrive when both partners value each other's opinions and allow themselves to be influenced by one another. It is when your spouse brings up and says, hey, I think we need to look at our budget. I think we might need to make a budget change. And instead of you saying something like, no, I handle the finances, let me handle the finances. Maybe try asking your partner, tell me more about what you're thinking. It's respecting each other's perspectives that strengthens the relationship. And so allowing yourself to be influenced is moving yourself to see the situation from your partner's angle and being curious about what they see that might be a blind spot on your side and vice versa. But allowing yourselves to be influenced by one another is important.
I'll just jump in on that one too, Luis. I think it's interesting that Gottman's data revealed that women are more apt to receive influence than men. And so this isn't going to be true in every case, but I do think when we're working with couples, it's an important kind of point to stop on and take notice of. Is it hard to receive influence from your partner and to have these questions and understand what is that about? But it is interesting on the surface that women are probably more apt to receive and men are more likely to resist that influence from their partner.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think his research, Kristen, pointed out that I think from couples that end up getting divorced, when they were surveyed, 80% of those couples had a partner that did not want to share power in the relationship. And I think that's really interesting to see that in those couples that did not work out, there was a struggle in sharing power and allowing themselves to be influenced by each other.
Such a good point. Principle 5, and again, this is another one. All of his work is so fascinating to me, but what I love that he really puts into language for us is that there's 2 types of problems. And we have perpetual problems and solvable problems. And unfortunately, 69% of our problems are perpetual, right? So they're not going away. They're going to be present in our marriage probably for the duration. So what do we want to do about that? And so he helps us get a mindset around how do we manage and still thrive in our relationship when we recognize that there are problems that are not going to go away and not going to be solved. And then we also have this other percentage of problems that are solvable. And he says, I want you to solve your solvable problem. Let's not leave those unresolved. So perpetual problems are 69% of our problems. And again, we want to have this mindset. That doesn't mean our marriage is set up for demise or divorce if we run into these perpetual problems. I'll have us go to the next slide then. Mm-hmm. So we probably all know what it feels like without even naming what the perpetual problems are in your relationship. It feels like bumper to bumper traffic, right? Both sides of the road, and you are completely stopped. It is, we are not going anywhere. There is not capacity to move in either direction. And this can be really frustrating in a marriage, right? And I'm sure as I'm saying this, you're probably all coming up with ideas in your head of where you feel this gridlock in your relationship. And gridlock feels like rejection. It feels like hurt and frustration. It's probably when we vilify each other and we make each other the bad guy. We keep talking, but we're not making any headway. We're just spinning our wheels. And we find it's often in these spaces where we call about our four horsemen because we're really at a loss for how to deal with this. And so I think it's really important to recognize and name when gridlock is present, and then to also be able to name, like, this is a perpetual problem. And so to come to agreement that the answer is not going to be a solution. It's going to be, how do we manage this perpetual problem in our life, right? So let's go to the next slide. With our solvable problems, they're typically less painful, a little less intense. And again, he wants us to step into solving these problems, which we'll go into in the next slide here. So with this, in solving our solvable problems, there's a few things that Gottman has made very clear as suggestions, remedies for our solvable problems. And the first one, these are all skills that our masters use versus kind of the disasters of relationship. And the first one is called a soft startup. And that'll be on our next slide here. So a soft startup is essentially just engaging in the conversation with a posture of gentleness, which can be very different than how some of us, right, myself included, sometimes engage my spouse in a conversation. Instead of using I statements or you statements, we go into it with a tone of just calmness, groundedness, gentleness. And this is really where our physiology comes into play, because if we recognize our heart is racing, we're feeling a little nauseous, our temples are pulsing, that is probably not the right time or space for you to engage in the conversation. So it's really making sure that you are grounded in a calmer space so that you can engage and have a safe conversation. Because when you or your partner becomes emotionally dysregulated, the conversation is not going to be productive or safe. So it's using a formula like the one he named here, which is, I feel X about X and I need X. So that's his formula for what it looks like to engage in a conversation that he calls a soft startup. The second part of solving our solvable problems is to make and receive repair attempts. And this is so interesting. When I work with all of my couples, I always ask them the question, do you know what the biggest difference is between a healthy and an unhealthy couple? And people usually say something like, well, communication, things like that. But successful couples, healthy couples, step into repair. That's the difference. Every couple fights. There is conflict in every relationship. So the goal here is not to avoid conflict. The goal here is to make sure that when the conflict de-escalates and we're in a grounded space, that we are making amends, extending and receiving repair. And so Gottman says this is truly a couple's secret weapon, making repair attempts and receiving repair attempts. And that looks like owning what's ours and accepting responsibility and then forgiveness. Number 3 is really learning to take care of yourself. And I think so many of us growing up didn't learn tools for emotional regulation. I think that our kids now, I see it in schools, I think we're educating our children so much more effectively on what it looks like to manage our feelings and regulate our own nervous systems. And so much of getting through conflict and managing our problems successfully is around knowing ourselves. It's taking a break, recognizing when we're flooded, triggered, been hijacked into fight or flight. I think another secret weapon is knowing when to take a break, right? If our child is having a tantrum, we don't try to stay and engage with them, right? We don't just try to push through when we're in the toy aisle of Target. We take a break. We give them a cool down. We give them a timeout. And we're the same way as adults. Nothing productive is going to happen when our heart rate is over 100 beats per minute and we're flooded and activated. So it's really that awareness to self so that you can show up as the best version of yourself to tackle and handle the conflict. And 4 is a posture of compromise. right? I think it's, again, with my work with couples, it often feels, and I use the analogy of a tug of war, right? And it feels like even in the office, couples are trying to pull each other into the mud. And when it feels like that, I think it's so important to recognize that the goal here is not for one person to win and one person to lose. The goal here is to elevate the relationship to a space where it feels like the relationship is winning, right? That we are doing what's best for the marriage. And so it's recognizing that we can yield and we can win, right? It's not about who's winning, who's losing. Solvable problems are such things often as money, intimacy, stress, in-laws, housework, parenting. So these would fall under the umbrella of solvable problems. And the last slides we just talked about are all solutions for how to attempt to solve our solvable problems.
This approach, Kristen, is so important in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that we oftentimes miss in relationships is those repair attempts.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at the list that they provide, the Gottman Institute provides, there's like humor in there. And sometimes we don't recognize that when we are both in an argument, discussing something like saying a joke is a way to repair, to change the attitude, the atmosphere in the relationship, be able to soothe yourself or soothe each other, and then come back to compromise regarding the chores or childcare or something else regarding those solvable problems. So that's such an important reminder. I love the starting the conversation with a soft startup.
Mm-hmm.
I statements. It's something that so simple. It maybe sounds like that, yet so powerful. And what a difference does it make? Principle number 6 is overcoming gridlock. If you remember from what Kristen just shared with us, walking us through as to when do we know that our problem is perpetual and that we are in gridlock. We're not making any movement or we're not making any progress. We feel stuck as a couple. And the truth is that is when gridlock happens, is when couples are stuck in the same argument because the underlying dreams aren't being addressed. Let me share this in this way. Oftentimes we as a couple get into the same argument because connected to that situation is a dream, a vow, a promise that we might have made when we were younger. There's an example of a couple that grew up very differently, like many of us do. She grew up in a home where it was always messy, and she felt a little embarrassed to bring in her friends over. So when she was young, she made the promise that when I get married and I have my own home, I'm gonna have it clean all the time. But little did she know that she was going to marry someone who grew up in a home where it was always clean. And he wasn't allowed to play ball in the house or to come in muddy sometimes or even get dirty when eating. So he made a vow, a promise, that when he got married and had his own house, he was going to be okay with it being messy. And so they got married. He wants the house to not be messy necessarily, but he wants to be able to be himself. And she wants the house to be clean all the time. And now they're gridlock. They're arguing about the cleanliness or the messiness of the house. That might sound familiar to many of you, maybe not with the same argument, but with something alike. When I was young, I made the promise that I was going to go to graduate school, I was going to become a doctor or get a doctorate degree. And my wife made the promise that when she got married, she was going to travel the world. So we got married young, and we ourselves were in a gridlock situation. She wanted to travel, I wanted to go to graduate school. But it wasn't until we actually talked about our deeper needs, our desires, our goals, that we were able to move away from gridlock and actually support each other. Because according to John Gottman's research, we are gridlock because we're not really talking about those dreams, expectations, needs that we have. And it is not until my wife and I had that conversation, or you as a couple have a conversation as to why do you need this as a couple. Maybe you end up getting to a place where you're exploring each other's deeper needs. And as a couple, then you begin to support those. Understanding them make a big difference. In some ways, we find a way to meet in the middle rather than dismissing each other's dreams. And that gets us to a place of, moving away from gridlock in the relationship. Kristen, what are your thoughts on this principle?
I love that Gottman uses this image, right? When he's talking about this, he says, this is gridlock. And he said, how do we move from gridlock to dialogue? And really, the answer is we just open up our hands, right? So we're still in the same space, but it's like this posture of surrender versus fighting against each other. And he said, when you open your hand, he said, you're releasing dreams. You're really releasing. It's almost like doves coming out of your hands when you open your hands in the middle of the conflict and you let your partner know what it's really about. Because he said, it's really the subtext. Like, we're not really talking about the cleanliness of a house or how much we're traveling or investing in school. It's about these dreams. It's about values. It's around who you thought you were going to be as a mother or what it means to be a family or about faith. I mean, deep personal parts of ourselves, which Gottman says, these things aren't going to change. He says, he uses this example. He said, it would be like somebody coming up to you and saying, can I borrow your bones? And the answer is, no, I need my bones. So it's not something that's going to change, but there can be this understanding about each other to understand where it's coming from. And with that, again, it all goes back to the beginning, right? We're increasing our love maps of knowing our partner better and understanding each other better in the context of the relationship.
Yeah, the vulnerability piece, it's vital to relationships. And I think that's a great reminder to open our hands and let ourselves fully be known by our spouse.
And finally, here we are. We're at the top of the pyramid and we're under an hour, so we're doing good, Luis. Final principle is shared meaning. And really, Luis keyed this up perfectly because it's going from this to this. Right? It's understanding that we come into the marriage with so much of ourselves, all of ourselves, right? And what does it look like to create shared meaning in this new experience that is our relationship? He says, every relationship is this cross-cultural experience. Every one of us is bringing a unique version of ourselves to the relationship, to the marriage. And so it takes a lifetime, and we're constantly evolving and changing in terms of our rituals, our roles, our goals, symbols. And Gottman has a lot of work in this area for us to do. Like, when we can get to this part in our relationship, it's like the sweet spot, right? We recognize the other stuff. We're not going to spend too much time on it, but this is really where we feel that growth and development in our relationship. And it's something for all of us to strive to. We're not going to be here all the time because life is hard and marriage is hard and takes a lot of work. But to Luis's point, when he said, when we started, if you can start with 10 minutes a day, you are going to start to feel and see improvement in your relationship quickly. And so, again, this idea of creating a shared meaning for your relationship, it's about understanding each other better and building some shared goals for yourselves, your family, what you want in your future. I don't know. What would you add to that, Luis?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you, Kristen, what's one of your rituals with your husband?
Oh, put me on the spot there. It's a simple one that's evolved over time, but it's date night, right? I think that it's not Gottman's research, but there's research out there that says for a couple to stay connected, they need 5.5 hours of time together a week. So that's no screens, no kids. So we try to stay connected to that formula. And it's not perfect. And sometimes we get more and sometimes we get less. But to have that as like a benchmark of what we're striving for, and that keeps us accountable to how we really invested in ourselves and in our relationship this week. I feel like because I'm always preaching that to other people and couples, right? I try to hold myself accountable to that because it really has been an effective formula for us in our marriage. So I don't know, Luis, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's one that you guys do?
This is something we actually do as a family, but it's something that I did not grow up doing, which is taking a road trip. So every summer, my daughter's wife and I pack our vehicle and we drive. We've been exploring the U.S. in a vehicle over the summer, and that's been such a wonderful time. We take out some get to know you cars, so we do love maps on our way there, not just between my wife and I, but between our daughters and us as a couple. I think that's such a nice tradition, ritual that we've been doing for the last couple of years. Actually, a few years at this point. That's fun.
I bet the girls love that.
They do. They do. I think you touched on this. Gottman comes up with the magic of 6 hours. And in his research, he is asking couples to really think about what they can do on a weekly basis to continue their connection as a couple. And he breaks this down as simple as he can. And just parting. If we can part by spending 2 minutes saying good morning to each other, giving each other a kiss, and maybe asking each other what our plan is for the day. And maybe that goes from 2 minutes to 10 minutes, but parting is something that we can do, as well as when we reunion. How are we meeting each other on the way back from work, school, or something else? Are we asking each other how our day was? Are we asking each other, if we could change something about our day, what would it be? It's just spending, that time with your spouse is important. And then this one I think is key, is the admiration and appreciation. It says spend 5 minutes times 7 days, which is 35 minutes, letting each other know what you appreciate from one another. And then affection, show affection, playfulness. Playfulness is such a positive emotional attractor. When we do playfulness with our spouse, with our children, it just makes us feel better, and it makes us as a couple feel really good. So playfulness, affection, and then think about spending some time together on a date. I tell my couples that date night doesn't have to be at night. It can be during the day. It can be over a Zoom lunch. It could be in the morning before both of us going into work. Spending some time together a week is important. And then having a State of the Union meeting every week, 20 minutes. How are we as a couple doing? He uses State of the Union. I use CEO meeting. I say it's our relationship. It's like a business. How is our business running? Are we doing well? So spend some time as the CEOs of your business and talking about how things are running in your relationship. So these are the 7 principles, and I'm so thankful that you were here, kind of hearing us share them with you. I do have a couple resources for you. One of them is this free gratitude journal that you can scan the QR code. It's going to ask you to sign up for a newsletter, but if you register for this, you are already part of our newsletter. But it will give you 21 days where you can journal and grow in your gratitude. And I invite you to do this as a couple. I think it would be great for you to do this as a couple. And then John talked about this already, but we are a counseling practice, 4 locations: Palatine, Grace, Lake Bluff, Northfield. And we do have a office that we sublease in the city where a couple of our clinicians see clients. There's our information. You can follow us on social media if you would want to do that. You're more than welcome, and we would appreciate that as well. But thank you. These are all of our clinicians. We, at the moment, I think have 28, including 4 interns that are working with us as part of our team.